Chapter 7 Apollonia. After the shooting of Captain McCluskey, the police took revenge on all 5 New York families. The 5 Families' War of 1946 had begun. But Michael wasn't there. He was hiding thousands of miles away, in Sicily. He was staying with Don Tomasino, a friend of his father's and a godfather himself. In the evenings, Michael sat in a huge garden filled with flowers, drinking wine and hearing old stories about his family. During the day, he walked in the Sicilian countryside, dressed in old clothes. 2 bodyguards, Fabrizio and Carlo, went everywhere with him, carrying guns over their shoulders. Michael often thought of Kay during these long walks in the white-hot sun. He felt sad and guilty that he had left America without saying goodbye to her. One morning, 7 months after arriving in Sicily, Michael decided to walk into the mountains past the hilltop town of Corleone. He walked with his 2 bodyguards along dusty country roads, past fruit trees and fields of flowers. The hot, still air was rich with the smell of oranges. Along the way, they met a group of girls and children picking flowers. They stopped to watch them pass. One girl in a simple dress with a basket over her arm stopped in front of Michael to pick a small pink flower. Michael watched her, studying the way that her long brown hair shone in the sunlight and hung around her face. Suddenly, the girl lifted her head and looked at him. She had large brown eyes, and her heart-shaped mouth was red with the juice of grapes. Michael felt weak, as if hit by lightning. He had never seen anyone so lovely. The girl lowered her eyes with a shy smile, ran back to join her friends and disappeared down the road. Fabrizio noticed the look on Michael's face and laughed. "Let's go and find out who she is," he suggested. Michael agreed, and followed Fabrizio and Carlo down a narrow path towards the village, where the girls and children had gone. In the village, they sat at a table outside a small cafe. The owner of the cafe was a short man with white hair and a dark mustache. He was a friendly man, and he smiled as he served them, not worried at all by the fact that his customers carried guns. When Fabrizio asked the cafe owner about the beautiful girl they had seen picking flowers, and described her to him, a strange thing happened. The man stopped smiling, looked at the 3 men angrily, and disappeared inside the cafe. Fabrizio followed him inside, and, moments later, ran out looking nervous. "Quick, we must go," he said to Michael. "He's really angry. The girl's his daughter." But Michael didn't move. He stared at Fabrizio and said, "I want to speak to him." Fabrizio quickly drank some wine, picked up his gun, and went inside to bring the man to Michael. The cafe owner appeared with 2 young, strong-looking men at his side. They were his sons. He looked down at Michael without speaking, a hard look in his eye. Michael spoke to him quietly. "I'm sorry if I made you angry," he said. "I'm an American hiding in Sicily. My name's Michael. You can tell the police and make a lot of money. But then your daughter would lose a father instead of getting a husband. With your agreement, I would like to meet your daughter. With all respect." The cafe owner's face softened. He looked with interest at Michael, this young man with a strange mixture of softness and confidence in his voice. He noticed that the 2 men with guns looked at this young man with great respect. He was obviously important and probably rich. "Come on Sunday afternoon," he said. "My name is Vitelli and my house is up there in the hills, above the village." "And what's your daughter's name?" Michael said, standing up and shaking the man's hand. "Apollonia," the cafe owner smiled. That Sunday, Michael, dressed in his best clothes, brought presents for Apollonia and all her family. He gave Apollonia some jewelry. He began to visit the family home regularly after that. One evening, at the dinner table, he noticed that she was wearing the jewelry he had given her. It was her way of saying that she liked him. He invited her for a walk in the country, and she agreed. They walked side by side, but they were careful not to touch each other. They were not alone. All the women in Apollonia's family walked behind them, followed by Carlo and Fabrizio, carrying their guns. 2 weeks later, Michael and Apollonia got married. Compared to his sister's wedding to Carlo in New York 2 years earlier, it was a simple Sicilian wedding. Apollonia wore white, while all the other women wore black. The villagers stood in the streets and threw flowers as the couple passed on foot from the church to Apollonia's house in the hills. The wedding guests walked behind the couple, and, behind the guests, there was a band of musicians. The wedding party went on until midnight. Then Michael took Apollonia away and drove her to Don Tomasino's house outside Corleone. Chapter 8. A bridge too far. 2 years after their wedding, Connie and Carlo Rizzi were not happily married. Carlo drank a lot and saw other women. Connie shouted at him all the time, and Carlo used to hit her. One day, Sonny visited his sister and saw her face was covered in bruises. He became very angry, and, although Connie tried to stop him, he rushed away to find Carlo. He found Carlo sitting outside the betting shop where he worked. Sonny jumped out of his car and ran quickly towards him. Carlo tried to escape, but Sonny dived and caught him by the ankles, pulling him down with a crash. Then, while Carlo was still on the ground, Sonny kicked and hit him, screaming at him all the time. Carlo didn't try to fight. He stayed on his knees and covered his head with his hands. Finally, Sonny grew tired. He looked down at Carlo's bruised and bloody body and said, "If you ever touch my sister again, I'll kill you." A few weeks later, the telephone rang in the kitchen of Don Corleone's house. Sonny was called to the phone. It was Connie, and she was crying. Carlo had hit her badly, and she wanted to come home. As he listened, Sonny's face went red, and he began to shake. "I'm coming right over," he told his sister. "Just wait there." "Please, Sonny, don't," Connie began, but Sonny put down the phone and ran straight out of the house. Tom Hagen tried to stop him, but Sonny refused to listen. As Sonny drove quickly out of the gates, Tom told 2 bodyguards to follow him. Between Long Island and the city of New York, there was a kind of bridge. Before anyone could cross, they had to stop at the toll booth and pay. When Sonny arrived at the bridge, only one toll booth was open. He had to wait, because another car was in front of him. Sonny impatiently looked for some money in his jacket pocket. The car in front of Sonny drove forward a little way and stopped. Sonny drove up to the toll booth. He gave the man inside his money and tried to drive away, but the car was still in front of him. The man in the toll booth dropped the money and bent down to pick it up. From the corner of his eye, Sonny noticed something moving in the empty toll booth on his right. He looked round and saw 4 men standing in the windows looking at him. At the same moment, 2 men got out of the car in front and began to walk towards him. They were carrying machine guns. Sonny thought about driving backwards, but he was too late. In the second before anything happened, Sonny knew that he was a dead man. There was a sudden thunder of noise, and bullets crashed through the windows of his car from all directions. Before Sonny could dive for cover, he was hit several times in the chest and head. But he was a strong man. He refused to die quietly. He pulled himself across the seat, opened the door and half jumped, half fell out of the car. He tried to pull his gun from his jacket, but bullets continued to hit him. At last, with a wild and angry look on his face, he fell to the ground in a pool of blood and stopped moving. By the time the bodyguards that Tom had sent to follow him arrived, Sonny Corleone, eldest son of Vito Corleone, was dead, and his killers were gone. Later that night, Tom Hagen sat alone in Don Corleone's dark office, drinking. He couldn't believe that Sonny was dead. He heard the door behind him open and close. Turning round, he saw Don Corleone. He looked very old and tired as he walked stiffly across the room. He had lost weight, and his clothes hung loosely from his body. "Give me some wine," he said as he lowered himself slowly into his favorite leather armchair. He waited while Tom poured him a drink, then half spoke, half whispered. "My wife was crying before she fell asleep. Outside my window, I saw Tessio and Clemenza coming to the house and it's midnight. So, Tom, I think you should tell your Don what everybody already knows." "I was about to come up and tell you," Tom said. "But you needed a drink first." "Yes." Tom looked down, ashamed. "You've had your drink. You can tell me now." Tom looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "They shot Sonny," he said, his voice shaking. "He's dead." Don Corleone closed his eyes. For a second he too seemed about to cry. But when he opened his eyes again, they were dry. "I want no revenge," he said sadly. "I want you to arrange a meeting with the heads of the 5 families. This war stops now." Chapter 9. A good American wife. In the first weeks of married life, Michael and Apollonia went for walks in the hills and drove around the countryside in their small black car. But news of the wedding had reached Michael's enemies. Don Tomasino told Michael that it was too dangerous for him to leave the house. He put men with guns around the house to guard him, and told Fabrizio and Carlo to stay with Michael all the time. Although he was a prisoner in his home, Michael wasn't too unhappy. He had Apollonia. He spent the time teaching her how to speak English and how to drive a car. One morning, Don Tomasino came home to tell Michael that Sonny was dead. It wasn't safe for Michael to stay in the house anymore. He had found a safe house outside Syracuse, and he would have to leave at once. Apollonia could live with her parents for a short time. She could join him later. The next morning, Michael stood at his bedroom window and saw Fabrizio sitting in a garden chair. "Get the car," Michael called down. "I'm leaving in 5 minutes. Is your wife coming with you?" Fabrizio asked. "No, I want you to take her to her father's house until I'm safe." Michael washed, then went downstairs to the kitchen, where he found Carlo having breakfast. "Where's Apollonia?" Michael asked. "She's in the car," Carlo said, his mouth full of bread. "You'll get a surprise. She's driving it alone. She'll make a good American wife." Michael smiled and went outside. Apollonia was sitting in the car, her hands on the wheel. She laughed and waved at him. But Michael was annoyed to see Fabrizio about to disappear through the garden gates. "Fabrizio, where are you going?" Michael called. Fabrizio looked over his shoulder at Michael, then continued to walk quickly away. Michael watched him go, confused at first. Then he looked at the car. Suddenly, without thinking, he realized there was danger. He shouted to Apollonia. "No, no," but she never heard him. There was a loud explosion and Michael was thrown to the ground. When he looked up, pieces of burning car were lying all over the garden. The bomb, which someone had intended for him, had killed his beautiful, innocent wife instead.